Good morning, everyone. Dear students, I hope that you are okay and that you are enjoying the best of health. The chapter I will talk about today is entitled Contrastive Analysis, which is part of the module Applied Linguistics for S5 students in Hassan's Second University in Casablanca, Faculty of Letters and Human Sciences, Mohammedia in Morocco. Now first, we'd like to define what do you mean by contrastive analysis. Contrastive analysis means simply the systematic comparison and contrasting of the mother tongue and the target language. We will see why we need that comparison later on. The hypothesis of contrastive analysis was deeply rooted in behaviorism and structuralism in the middle of the 20th century when they were in their heyday. The assumption of contrastive analysis is that the mastery or the mother tongue has an influence on acquiring the second language. In other words, the student's prior knowledge of his mother tongue has an influence on learning or acquiring a second language, which is called interference. So there is a kind of interference which can be sometimes positive, sometimes it can be negative. So according to contrastive analysis, this knowledge of L1 stands as an obstacle to L2 learning. So to do a kind of contrastive analysis, we need a scientific analysis of both the mother tongue and the target language by classifying all the linguistics contrasts between, or at least trying to classify the linguistic contrasts between the mother tongue and L2. If this is done, then it would be possible to predict difficulties a learner would face. For example, if we take into consideration the Moroccan student who has a prior knowledge of Arabic as a mother tongue, and then he is about to study French. Now, what do we remark is that in the Arabic language we have the vowels A, O, E, while in French, for example, there are some vowels that exist in the phonemic inventory of the French language but do not exist in Arabic, such as the vowel E and U. So for a beginner learning French, contrastive analysis predicts that the learner will face difficulties in acquiring those sounds or those vowels that do not exist in the phonemic inventory of the mother tongue. And this is something that we witness as language teachers. Same for a French student, for example, who is about to learn Arabic. We can expect that the French student will have difficulties to pronounce sounds that, or consonants that do not exist in the French language, like the sound q or the pharyngeal sound h. These sounds, the French students will have difficulties in acquiring. So according to contrastive analysis, second language learning is mainly about surmounting the differences between the native and the target language. In other words, if we have similarities, then we can witness an ease in the process of learning second language. And if we have differences, then we can expect difficulties. This hypothesis of contrastive analysis has appeal is that there are many errors which are due to negative transfer of the native language to the target language. Now, if we go back to the vowel system of Arabic, we have the three vowels A, O, E, and again, the Moroccan who is about to learn French will face vowels that he doesn't have in his phonemic inventory, namely E and U. So whenever the student, especially as a beginner, would like to pronounce E, he will tend to pronounce as O. And whenever he would like to pronounce U, he will pronounce as E. This is something which is done worldwide in all languages. What learners do unconsciously is that whenever they face a vowel, for example, or a consonant that doesn't exist in their phonemic inventory, what they do is that they substitute it or they replace it with the nearest sound in terms of point and place of articulation. Now, in contrastive analysis, we have 4 procedures, namely description. So first, we need to describe the 2 languages using formal grammar and trying to describe different aspects of both languages. Now, of course, it is virtually impossible to compare and contrast all aspects of 2 languages. That's why selection is a must. We need to select some aspects of language, as I did in the previous example. For example, we can compare the phonemic inventory of the 2 languages, which is a little bit easier than comparing all aspects of language, which is nearly impossible. After doing that, we need the contrast itself. In other words, we map the 2 systems onto each other, and then we can come up to the conclusion of the existing differences between L1 and L2. Automatically, after adopting the 3 steps, we can come up to the conclusion when errors can be predicted according to contrastive analysis. Now here we have to make a difference between the strong and the weak claim of the contrastive analysis. The strongest claim, according to Lado, is a pioneer in the field, is that this analysis can predict and describe the patterns of language that will cause difficulty by comparing the mother tongue and L2. So automatically we can come up to the conclusion that aspects of language that are similar in both mother tongue and L2 will be easier to learn or to acquire. Whereas different things, as the example of the vowels that we don't have in Arabic, or consonants that we don't have in French, those will cause difficulties for the learner. Now here we have identified scales of difficulty according to contrastive analysis, and here we have 3 levels. The first one is, or the first case is when we have a rule, L1, or the mother tongue has a rule, and L2 has an equivalent one. automatically we can expect, according to contrastive analysis, if the rule exists in both the mother tongue and the target language, automatically we can expect that there will be no difficulty in learning that aspect of language. The second level is when L1 has a rule, but L2 has no equivalent one. So here again, a little bit in this level, the situation or the learning process would be a little bit more difficult. In the third level, which is the case where we have a rule in second language and we don't have an equivalent one in the mother tongue. So here we expect that the difficulty will be much higher in this context. So the strong version of contrastive analysis is that it can predict difficulty. As we have said, you can expect that it can predict difficulty, mainly when we compare L1 and L2 and we identify differences. Those differences we can predict that they can be difficult to grasp, to understand, and to acquire in a quicker time. Still, this strong version seems to be unrealistic and practicable, because not all errors or mistakes made by students are due to the influence of the mother tongue, as we will see later on. It is true, as practitioners, as teachers, from our own experience, many mistakes made by students, we can find that they are due to the interference of the mother tongue or the L1 or previous languages that the student knows. But not all errors and not all mistakes are due to the interference of the mother tongue or the first languages known, and we'll see later on what can cause errors apart from interference. So the contrastive analysis is tenable in its weak version, and needless to repeat that many mistakes are due to the interference of the mother tongue or the impact of the mother tongue, and this is an unconscious process. I mean, students, whether they like it or not, they are influenced by either the one language or the many languages they know. If we take the Moroccan context, in which we have a very complex linguistic map, we have many Moroccans who have as a mother tongue Moroccan Arabic. There are others who have Amazigh or one of the Amazigh varieties. Plus, since primary school, since Moroccan education is bilingual, so the student faces French and acquires French, and also classical Arabic, so, and mainly the big difference between classical Arabic and Moroccan Arabic, and then we can move to studying English or any other foreign language. So all these languages that, or dialects that the students acquire or knows before have an impact on learning other languages. And here I have provided some examples that myself as a teacher, I keep on reminding my students so that they don't fall in the trap of spelling or mistakes in spelling which are due to the interference of the French language. So being an English language teacher, and since all our students who've been through the education system are bilingual, francophone, and then they're starting to learn English, they tend to confuse, especially when we have words that look alike in terms of pronunciation, but in terms of spelling, there is a difference, and here is the role of the teacher to remind students and draw their attention so that they don't make their mistakes, especially in writing tasks. And here I have an example of the French word appartement, and you see here that appartement is written with a double P, and there is an E after T, whereas in English, apartment, I mean, when you hear it at the very beginning, you may think that it is written the same way, but again, in the English word, it's one P and no E after T. The word développement in French, double P, while in English, it's one P. In environnement in French, double N, and in English, one N and no E after the N. The word ponctuation with O, and in English it's punctuation. So here it's a difference not just in spelling, but also in pronunciation. But the problem is that many students, when they hear them, especially when they are beginners at the very beginning, since they hear the word, they think it is written in the same way, and we have many examples like that. The example that comes to my mind right now is the word vacancy in English, which looks like the word vacances in French, while they have nothing to do. I mean, in my first courses in university, I try to draw attention to my students, saying, hey, pay attention, though there are similarities between the French language and the English language, still there are many differences, and so that they don't confuse words in terms of their meaning and in terms of their also spelling. Now, how can we pedagogically exploit contrastive analysis? It can be exploited by predicting, that's to say, pre-identifying the aspects that will cause problems. Now here, aspects like the example I have just provided, being myself a francophone teacher, being a Moroccan, teaching Moroccans, I can expect as a teacher and as a Moroccan the type of mistakes that can be made due to knowledge or prior knowledge of other languages. So here, predicting means predicting difficulty. It means that students will find problems in pronouncing sounds that do not exist in their mother tongue, writing words in a different way. Now, especially when we move from Arabic to French, for example, different writing system, different alphabet, writing from left to right or from right to left. These are all difficulties that can face the child in his first contact with the language. So we can predict difficulty, we can predict errors, we can even predict the tenacity of certain errors. The more differences we have between languages, the more problems students can face according to contrastive analysis. Yet, as I said before, not all errors are the result of L1 interference, or not all errors are interlingual errors. Not all errors that are made by students are a consequence of their prior knowledge of other languages, though some of them are a consequence of this knowledge, but not all of them. There are other errors that are due to the difficulty of the target language, which we call intralingual errors. And here, I would like you, dear students, to make a distinction between interlingual errors, that is due to interference from L1 to L2, and intralingual errors that are due to difficulties linked to the second language itself. There are also other errors due to the transfer of training. In other words, in Arabic, for example, in a sentence, we tend to start with a noun and then the adjective. Whereas in English, it's the other way around. And so students, again, as beginners in learning English, sometimes have this problem of word order, because again, whether they like it or not, when they speak and they are beginners in learning the language, they tend to translate. And the translation sometimes is done word for word translation. And of course, when you keep on this word for word translation, you fall in the trap of having word order that is not accepted in the English language. So we say in Arabic, al-waladu dhaki, for example. So here al-walad, which means the boy, dhaki, smart. But in English we say the smart boy. So you see the order here is completely the opposite. And so students tend to transfer what they have learned in Arabic and keep the same rule while learning other languages. And of course it leads to mistakes. Other errors are due to strategies of L2 learning. And we know every student is unique and every student has his own strategies in L2 learning. The strategies adopted by an introverted student are not like the strategies adopted by an extroverted student, for example. Okay? There are some students who rely on memorization. There are some students who rely on translation. So all those strategies can sometimes lead to problems. So the conclusion to achieve is that, yes, there are some mistakes which are due to the influence of the mother tongue on learning second language, yes, but it's not always the case. As I said, there are errors due to the complexity of the second language itself, to the transfer of learning, that's to say the thing that we have learned, our prior knowledge has an influence on our next learning process. And also the strategies adopted by the student can have an impact on his learning and can lead to errors. So as a pedagogical exploitation, we can say that at least contrastive analysis can help in diagnosing errors, and that's the weakest version of contrastive analysis, which is more tenable than the strong version. So we would say that the weak version of contrastive analysis that states that this analysis has a diagnostic function rather than a predictor of error, which is the strong version of contrastive analysis, because again, not all errors are due to interference of the mother tongue. As a pedagogical exploitation, we can talk about contrastive teaching. So here the role of the teacher in contrastive teaching is to present to the learner all, between inverted commas, terms in a linguistic system of L2 that contrast with L1. And this is possible sometimes, especially, for example, if you compare phonemic inventory of two languages. Because it's limited, we can compare and say, okay, we have this sound in this language, we don't have it in that language. We have that vowel here, we don't have it here. We have that consonant here, we don't have it here. And then we can expect problems here, and students should be made aware of that. Now, as far as the method adopted in contrastive analysis, this hypothesis is method neutral. Whatever method you adopt, so there is no problem, as long as you take into consideration the influence of the mother tongue on learning the second language. Now here, when a learner is learning a second language, he does not, there is, it's like there are stages in front of the learner before reaching near full mastery of the target language. And here, before reaching that full mastery or near full mastery of second language, he can devise or can come up with what we call an interlingua, which is a reduced dialect of the target language. And this specific dialect was named in different ways by different applied linguists, like some have called it approximative systems, others have called it idiosyncratic dialects. So it is a dialect in between, okay, before reaching full mastery of the second language, and it is a normal process. It's impossible to move from zero knowledge of a language to a full knowledge of a second language without going step by step. So here in teaching, it is advised that the teacher starts with parallel constructions, starting or pseudo-parallel constructions between L1 and L2. In other words, starting with similarities between L1 and L2 before moving to differences, because as contrastive analysis hypothesis stipulates, the differences between L1 and L2 will lead to difficulties. That's why we have to postpone talking about differences later on and start with similarities because they are easier to acquire. Now, as a conclusion, we'd say that languages, if we stipulate that, I'm sorry, yes, let's go back. I have gone so far. If we say that in contrastive analysis we need to compare L1 and L2, so is it possible to compare? And if yes, by which criterion are they best compared? Another question that raises is if we say that each language, which is something said by structuralists themselves, if we say that each language is unique, how can we compare them? Still, one way to defend their opinion is to say that comparability does not presuppose identity. So when we compare, we are not saying that the two languages or the two linguistic systems are the same. So that's why you can say that contrastive analysis is fraught with controversy, mainly the point that I have just mentioned about the uniqueness of each language. So though, even for human beings, we say that every human being is unique, but at the same time, we share a lot with other human beings. Same for languages. Though in terms of structure, we can say that each language is unique, but still, there are many shared elements between languages. For example, practically in all languages, we can say that they share some grammatical aspects, like, for example, singular, plural, female, masculine, referring to the present, past, and the future. This is something universal that can be found in all languages, but still each language is unique. So the thing that you have to remember, please, is that contrastive analysis is tenable in its weak version, namely as diagnostic function, and that it can predict the mistakes or the errors that are due to the influence of the mother tongue, though, as we have said, not all errors are due to first language. Thank you very much.